In October 1856, shortly after the suppression of the Red Turban Rebellion, the Second Opium War erupted between China and Britain. This time, the Anglo-French Allied forces successfully entered Guangzhou, significantly impacting its political landscape. This brings us to the third part of our discussion. The Anglo-French forces took direct control of the exhausted city of Guangzhou and its surrounding regions. This wave of upheaval propelled South China into an entirely new phase. As previously mentioned, after successfully resisting foreign merchants' entry in 1849, Sino-British diplomacy reached a standstill. However, following the Treaty of Nanjing, the Qing government signed treaties with France and America containing a 12-year revision clause, citing most favored nation status. Britain demanded treaty revisions to expand trade opportunities with China. The Qing court naturally misunderstood foreign powers' intentions, and the emperor deeply resented these overreaching foreigners. Flushed with their Guangzhou victory, the court adopted delaying tactics and evasive responses, hoping to appease Britain and France. Consequently, the change-resistant Qing dynasty gave Western powers renewed pretext for war, making Guangzhou again the conflict's frontline. After the Second Opium War began, Guangzhou rapidly organized defenses, but maintaining government troops and militia required enormous funding. The prior Red Turban Rebellion had already depleted Guangzhou's resources. War further crippled Guangzhou's economy, with many gentry unable to sustain exorbitant military costs. Thus, when Britain slowed attacks during the 1857 Indian Rebellion, Guangzhou disbanded militia and dismantled fortifications, weakening defenses. But when Anglo-French forces returned at year's end, only scattered militia resisted. Governor-General Yi Mingchen refused negotiations yet lacked combat capability. With faulty intelligence, he remained in his yamen, sending false, optimistic reports to Emperor Shanfang. Thus, in January 1858, Anglo-French forces captured Guangzhou, taking Yi Mingchen prisoner, the only provincial governor captured in Qing history. After receiving the news, Emperor Qianfeng dismissed this Han Chinese whom he had previously relied on heavily and even ennobled. This Manhai County magistrate, whom the emperor considered a capable minister, ultimately died in exile in Calcutta, India. There's a Chinese saying, "It's easy to conquer the realm, but hard to rule it." The Anglo-French allied forces knew that with their own troops smoothly ruling Guangzhou with its nearly 1 million population was impossible without local government cooperation. Therefore, they installed then Guangdong Governor Bo Gi to establish a puppet government. Bo Gi remained the nominal local ruler, but all decisions required approval from the British representative. Britain, this stranger, became the de facto ruler of Guangzhou. However, Chinese resistance did not end. Under these circumstances, former officials from Yi Mingchen's government, such as the Judicial Commissioner, Anchashi, meaning the Judicial Department, the Prefect Magistrate, Jifu, meaning the Administrative Agency, and the Grain Intendant Liang Dao, who can be seen as the Logistics Department, established a shadow government in Foshan, providing disaffected gentry with an opportunity to communicate directly with the imperial court. So, among them, Long Yuanxi, Luo Beian, and Su Tingkri were the most representative figures. They jointly petitioned Emperor Xianfeng to organize militia and successfully obtained approval. Thus, like Sen Gufan, they became centrally appointed militia ministers. As soon as they received permission from above, they immediately established the Guangdong Militia Bureau in Huaxian, outside Guangzhou, now Huadu District, recruiting troops from Dongguan and Xin'an counties and obtaining financial support from Shunde region. Moreover, they absorbed many scattered militia forces, quickly expanding their scale and influence, preparing to engage in a tug-of-war with the foreign invaders. Consequently, foreigners in Guangzhou suddenly found the situation tense again Their heads became bounties. At night, people would set fires and cause trouble, and they couldn't even buy food or hire workers. But this time, the Anglo-French forces did not compromise. They held firm, increased patrols, controlled traffic, closed some city gates, and set up permanent barracks. In July 1858, the three militia ministers in charge felt fully prepared and led a force of about 7,000 militia to attack Guangzhou. But under the fierce artillery fire of the Anglo-French Allied forces, they were quickly defeated. At this point, Beijing issued instructions to Guangdong. Since the British forces aren't troubling the city's officials and gentry, we shouldn't provoke them. And the court was now pouring all national resources into fighting the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom in the southeast. With the Yangtze River line blocked, it couldn't send troops or supplies south to support Guangdong like during the First Opium War. Having acknowledged the co-governance system and facing military defeats, plus the emperor's order against rash actions, Guangdong's main militia forces disintegrated. To expand their control, the Anglo-French Allied forces began sweeping through rural areas to eliminate opposition, destroying two major militia organizations. One was the base of the aforementioned Guangzhou Militia Bureau. This operation quelled militia activities around Guangzhou. In previously resistant areas, village elders would line up to warmly welcome British patrols whenever they appeared. Thus, both urban and rural areas came under Anglo-French control. Soon, Guangzhou accepted this reality and developed cooperative relations with the Allied forces. Both government and common people began viewing the Allied forces as a stabilizing presence. The puppet government hoped to use the Anglo-French forces to suppress rebellions and maintain regional security. When rebellion erupted in Zhaoqing and Jiang in 1859, the Allied forces' presence reassured Guangzhou's residents as the strongest protection against rebel looting. The ordinary people hoped to eliminate corruption and injustice, reform taxes, restore the economy, and saw the Allied forces as reliable means to achieve this. Initially, the Anglo-French forces did fulfill these roles. They abolished the 3% surtax that city officials imposed on Guangzhou's small shopkeepers. This tax was a commodity transit levy originally increased to suppress South China rebellions. Moreover, the Allied forces halted the evil practice of human trafficking. These measures won farmers' and merchants' gratitude. In contrast, the three militia ministers' efforts to revive the Guangdong Militia Bureau paled. By then, many gentry and farmers had stopped cooperating with these ministers, refusing to fund their activities. When tax collectors from the Militia Bureau appeared, villages even resorted to armed self-defense. And in the end, the Militia Bureau just faded away. In 1861, the Second Opium War ended, and the Anglo-French Allied forces withdrew from Guangzhou, returning control of the city to the Qing government. However, after experiencing anti-foreigner movements, militia uprisings, the Red Turban Rebellion, and cooperation with the Anglo-French forces, Guangzhou was no longer the city it was 20 years ago. The barbarians, whom Confucian culture once looked down upon, had become rulers, performing quite well. Confucian teachings lost persuasiveness, and prejudice against strangers in the Pearl River Delta weakened significantly. But here we need to clarify one point: the two Opium Wars. The main purpose of Britain and France launching the wars was to open up the Chinese market and find outlets for their products. Therefore, the nature of the war focused on occupying key commercial ports like Guangzhou and maintaining local peace. Thus, some people in Guangdong even felt these invaders could uphold justice and bring tangible benefits. But if we broaden our historical perspective to India under British imperialist conquest, people likely wouldn't have such illusions. In India, British colonists aimed to plunder local resources. Vast lands were used for cotton cultivation, ignoring severe famines. If British colonists had adopted the same approach in South China or encroached during India's conquest era, they probably would have penetrated Guangdong and Fujian, enslaving locals to transform the area into a base for cash crops like sugar, tea, and cotton. Similar to how during Japan's invasion of China, inhumane means were used to plunder iron and coal from northeast China and Shanxi, then colonialism's cruelest aspects might have been fully exposed. However, regardless, after the two Opium Wars' impact, South China's authority reshuffled, perceptions broadened, and seeds of change were sown. Once the time was right, they'd take root and sprout. Later, Guangdong became a key source of late Qing overseas students, an early hotspot for the Republican Revolution, pioneering new trends. Meanwhile, after the Second Opium War, Western aggressors' influence spread to northern ports and inland areas. Under external pressures, the resistance, changes, and cooperation seen in Guangzhou would replay in those regions. The 2 decades of turbulence in South China society during the Opium Wars serve as compelling evidence for the impact response theory. Foreign aggression stimulated militarization in South China, where emerging social forces and crisis affected commoners formed a collective challenge to traditional authority. Combined with further foreign actions, South China became a trend-setting region, pioneering modernization. I've chosen to discuss Strangers at the Gate. This book skillfully applies the impact response theory with deep research, moving beyond major historical events to reveal their long-term societal effects on the lasting impacts on social life. The core content originates from author Frederick Wakeman's doctoral dissertation. When he began writing his thesis, Wakeman's research focused on the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement. As we know, the Taiping Rebellion officially started in Guangxi, where the movement expanded. Precisely between the two Opium Wars, Wakeman believed understanding the Taiping Rebellion's roots required refocusing on Guangdong. What transformations occurred in this first Western-impacted region during the Opium Wars? Well, and how did these changes affect the entire South China region, including Guangxi, Hong Kong, and Macau? While compiling materials, Wakeman discovered South China society's extreme complexity. Beyond officials and elites, ordinary people's fates, social structures, and family relationships underwent drastic changes under Western invasion, existing in constant flux. Ultimately, this turbulence became Wakeman's research focus, prompting him to examine through the impact response model how Western invaders forced open Guangzhou's gates, triggering South China's societal reshuffle. Well, that concludes our discussion of Strangers at the Gate. Reading lists are below the audio. We'll see you tomorrow.